Hello, freedom loving people, and welcome to another episode of the Restricted Handling Podcast. You've got Ryan and Glenn, as always, and we are so grateful to be joined once again by David Fitzgerald, 37-year veteran of the CIA, multi time chief of station with positions within Latin America division. Had him on before when we were talking Venezuela covert action a few months back. So much has happened. And just to get us up to speed, the early morning hours of January 2nd, U.S. ran what General Kane described as an apprehension mission, went in with Delta Force, 150 aircraft, conventional and special operations forces, and apprehended Nicolás Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, and moved them to where they are now in New York. This was an amazing operation from a military and combined arms standpoint, not just military, but CIA, DEA, you mentioned NGA, NSA, heavy cross-functional joint effort, pulled off seemingly flawlessly. Some of the information that we have about how they set the stage for this was truly interagency. They mentioned, and this is all public, CIA put folks on the ground sometime around August. They got an asset somewhere within Maduro's party who was able to report on his movements, pets, food, etc. We'll talk about how they set the stage for this, but they did this all through cover of darkness, early morning hours of January 2nd. Got Maduro out. And what we've heard so far is that the U.S. is going to run Venezuela. Not a ton of information on what that will look like exactly, but it does not seem to be boots on the ground at this point in time, although we haven't ruled that out. Looks like we are giving the opportunity to Maduro's vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, right now, and not opposition leader in exile, a Nobel Peace Prize winner, Machado, which is maybe a little bit surprising. President Trump came out yesterday in his announcement and just said Machado likely does not have the respect of the people. And right now they're giving the opportunity to the sitting vice president, who has not been as happy to hear that and has openly noted that they want Maduro returned and this is a breach of sovereignty. So lots going on, tons to unpack. Dave, thank you so much for joining us. I have to imagine, like with Vector One and your consulting business, you and Glenn, you're probably getting a lot of calls now for people who want to understand what's going on in Venezuela, in Latin America. Thank you for taking time with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Ryan. I feel like Glenn during the Ukraine war, and him being the subject matter expert on Russia and the Ukraine became a highly popular person. So always got time for restricted handling.
Thank you so much. Dave, if I can just pass it over to you, how surprised are you about this? We talked a few months back, the U.S. was running covert action that was announced publicly. They were taking boat strikes militarily. How surprised are you to see what we're seeing now?
Before we jump in there, I do have to say that Ryan called this in our end of year podcast. He predicted this, as he said to me on the phone last night, Ryan 1, Glenn 0. But Ryan is spot on.
That's right. Dave, we did a 2026 predictions, and one of them was the U.S. will invade Venezuela. And Glenn said no, I said yes. But I'm a little bit worried because Glenn also said that he thinks we're going to see regime change in Iran this year. And I said no, and it's already starting off rocky for me.
Well, listen, I'm super excited that Ryan was right and I was wrong, because honestly, I mean, this is a good way to start 2026, in my opinion, whenever you have a thug and a criminal brought to justice. But I'll turn it over to Dave.
First of all, I don't want to jump the gun. We're not at that regime change right now. In fact, if you take a deep dive on Delcy Rodriguez, you're seeing a lot of Maduro in Delcy Rodriguez. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. Just a quick background on her. She originally came in with Chavez, Hugo Chavez. She was a very loyal Chavista during his presidency. I mean, she was with him since the 90s as a kind of a young revolutionary. And then when Chavez died, 2013, she transitioned to the Maduro government. She's been the Minister of Energy for Maduro. She was the foreign minister for Maduro. She's held all kinds of senior positions, which is normal among the inner circle because they tend to just rotate positions. So the type of person that's willing to transition, or at least lead a transition to a democratic government or to fair elections, time will tell. But her track record is somewhat as a hardcore Chavista, but we'll see. We'll see where this goes. So kind of just quick scene setter where we're at. I mean, kudos to, our intelligence community, our military, having been the DCI rep at CENTCOM during the operations against Soleimani and Baghdadi and some of these other guys. I mean, watching the guys work from inside was just truly amazing. And so I can only imagine how they really put this together over a course of a few months to really spectacular operation. As you know, I got to give President Trump and General King credit. I'm sure no other military in the world could do what they just did.
No, it was amazing.
That's half the solution. Now the challenge is, as President Trump said yesterday during the press conference, we intend to run Venezuela and transition towards a democratic and free government, which is great. But there's number one, a lot of things to be defined between now and when the policy really takes place. And there's going to be a lot of obstacles to overcome. Let's start with PDVSA and the importance of PDVSA. PDVSA is the state-owned oil company. PDVSA during the 90s was one of the most well-run oil companies in the world, bar none, to include both state-run and privately held oil companies. They managed everything. They owned everything from downstream to upstream, meaning that they pulled the oil out of the ground. They transported it in pipes to the refinery. They refined the oil. They owned the tankers, the oil tankers that brought it to the U.S. or around the world. They owned the refineries in the Gulf Coast. And they had the distribution nationwide in the U.S. with Citgo gas stations. It was a extremely well-run organization, very profitable, and basically was the kind of cash cow for Venezuela, both before and after Chavez won the election. The problem was that Chavez kind of took it and just milked it, fired all the PDVSA employees, most of the professionals. In fact, if you did a poll right now, looked at some like Exxon, Chevron, BP, some of these other multinationals, you'd find a lot of former PDVSA employees because they were sought after. Once Chavez fired all of them, they just said, okay, we'll go get a job because they were that good. So if you're going to rebuild the country, if you're going to reinstitutionalize democracy, right, and you don't want to use a ton of U.S. taxpayer money like we did in Iraq, some other places, right, you're going to need PDVSA to be an efficient oil-producing, profitable company. So that's number one. They're going to need to get PDVSA up and running again. They're probably producing maybe, I'm just wild guess here, 15 to 20% of what they were producing during their peak time in the 90s before Chavez was elected. They've lost most of their ability, all their shipping now. They don't have the shipping fleet anymore. They've sold their refineries in the Gulf Coast. Citgo now was sold years ago, decades ago, to raise money, which was then spent and wasted by the Chavez Maduro government. So you're looking at basically just a oil company that's pretty much in the emergency room. Okay, so that would be kind of a priority number one. Get them in there running. Chevron's in there big time. They never really left. They're the one, a multinational, never left. Talked with a Chevron employee the other day. He was telling me they have over 200 people, 200 Americans working in Venezuela. Okay, and
Dave, can I interrupt you real quick
yeah.
on that point? I was surprised to hear that, and you were very clear about that last time that we spoke. Obviously, people have heard now Venezuela has the largest known oil reserves. With Chevron having been there that whole time with employees on the ground, how safe are they or were they throughout that time? Were they kind of untouchable in that area because of how lucrative the trade is?
I mean, good question. I asked the same question to my friend who works at Chevron. He said, yeah, pretty much. I said, if they mess with Chevron, they're going to mess with their main money stream.
Yeah.
And if they try and hold, Chevron employees as political hostages, you're going to lose you're going to cause more problems than you solve. So Chevron's always been there, and we'll see where it goes. But the problem is, it's so bad right now. Can't emphasize this enough that the oil fields themselves, the drilling is just a complete shambles. They haven't been able to. I'm not an oil expert, but most oil people tell you have to maintain an oil field and an oil drill. You have to balance it by pumping things out, pumping things in. You have to maintain the equipment. And basically, it's like you have a fleet of cars, you have 10 cars, you just use one until it breaks down, then you grab another one. right? And you never fix the other ones. They're on maybe their second to last or the last car right now. Chevron's been the only ones to be able to maintain their oil fields. All the ones held by PDVSA are in shambles. The refineries are in badly need of maintenance and repairs. It's a $1 billion plus effort to really get PDVSA up to speed.
Dave, what do you think with the vice president, or now, I guess, the acting president, Rodriguez, given her background and what you mentioned about her? The president said that Rubio had a discussion with her and that she seemed to be on board with the plan that the president talked about with getting U.S. oil companies, energy companies in there to help rebuild the oil industry that you mentioned is in major disrepair. What's your assessment?
That's a great question, Glenn. And the way the official party is the PSUV, the Partido Socialista Unido de Venezuela, the Socialist United Party of Venezuela. There's factions within this party. So Delcy does not have control over the party, over the government. She only has control over her faction. So then you got to worry about the kind of on the military security side is the Minister of Interior, Diosdado Cabello, who has been a kingpin ever since. He had his issues with Maduro, but they kind of learned to live together and came to an agreement that one needed the other. I'm really curious to see that. For me, that's probably one of the key persons right now, the personalities. He's already been on TV, pounding his chest and everything like that. He's pretty hardcore, but like with any autocratic government, these people, at least their understanding is, my survival depends on our ability to maintain our power. So how do you convince them to transition? Do you do it forcefully, or do you do it by offering them kind of a golden parachute? And this is where I'm very curious to see where the administration is going to go on this, because these guys are not just going to say, okay, come on in. Remember, we don't even have an embassy in Caracas. We closed the embassy, I think, 2018, 2019. So we have no official representation in Caracas. I would, again, hopefully that one of the requirements that they're going to ask of the Delcy Rodriguez government is that we reopen the embassy and get some presence back, because we need a presence that we won't be able to do this from Miami. Right now, the State Department has its Venezuela unit in the U.S. Embassy in Bogota. It doesn't work. So let's start with reopening the embassy, get some heavy hitters down there that understand the situation and that can dialogue with the government. Okay. So the other issue is the security situation. Having been involved in two similar yet different kind of transitional government operations, both in Haiti and in Panama, the key to the success of those transitions to a democratic government was the security situation. Unlike where in Iraq, we debathetized the whole security network. We basically said, Army, you're all fired, police, you're all fired, and now we're going to create our own whatever from the Shia militias. That worked out well, right? In Haiti, both and in Panama, what we did is we basically came in and said, okay, we're going to establish a interim security force, and everybody within the security service has an ability to apply for this. And if you're vetted positively and you meet the requirements, you'll be able to join the force. So instead of just alienating the security forces, right, we incorporated that into the project, right? And in Panama, it was extremely successful. We took the Panamanian Defense Forces and turned them into what is now one of the more professional police forces in Latin America, the Panamanian National Police. In Haiti, at the time, we brought in, I don't know if you remember Commissioner Kelly from the New York PD. We brought him in to lead the interim police department through the UN, and established vetting process for all the police officers and the military officers that we felt would be available to form a security service. They need to start thinking about how they're going to do that now. In Venezuela, it's a bit different than the rest of Latin America, because the security services, more the police services, are much more akin to how we have it in the United States. They have state police services, police departments, and municipal police departments. Caracas is a great example. The metropolitan area of Caracas, I think there's 3 or 4 different police forces that have jurisdiction in their sectors. One is the municipality of Caracas, and then you had the Miranda State Police, which handle maybe a third of Caracas. Then you have one or two other smaller municipal police departments. We need to start working with them. We need to start vetting these police services in order to establish some type of security baseline, because the one thing people are going to be looking at for us to provide is that security, because you have this presence of the colectivos. You have maybe 15 to 20% of the population who are going to support Maduro.
I'm glad you brought up Panama. I hadn't made the connection to Haiti, but I do think it's worth just for people listening. Panama in 1989, lot of similarities to what we just saw. You go in to remove Noriega on criminal charges for drugs and strategic impact because of the canal zone in Panama, right? So very similar to Maduro with drugs and trafficking and the oil reserves, the strategic aspect of that all within the hemisphere. And it is a seemingly great example of transition compared to Iraq, where we really got it wrong. Surprising they didn't use a similar method in Iraq. We don't need to get into that. But I'm really glad you brought up Panama.
The concept was the same. We didn't have boots on the ground. We had boots on the ground, unlike in Venezuela.
That's true.
There were some parallels and some big differences, right? We had history in Panama. We had troops in Panama. And going to the training of a new security force, one of the questions I think is, how do we do that without boots on the ground? Can you reliably do that?
Well, one of the factors I think that could work in our favor is that if you look at the rank and file of the police and the military, these guys are not Chavistas. They're not ideologues. They're not doing this because they believe in this Bolivarian revolution and they're gonna, everybody's equal, right? They're doing it for survival, right? It's not a combat military. I mean, these guys, it's a social service military, much like the Cubans. I mean, they might have one or two specialized units that might be somewhat capable, but these guys are basically just guards and, social work military that go out there and, do social work. I think they'd be more than willing to kind of transition to a interim type police security service, right? I think there's enough people out there. It's just a matter of how do you set up such a mechanism to do it. But, the leaders, Venezuela has the highest, I think it's double than the number two. They have the highest number of flag rank officers anywhere in the world as a per capita. Again, that was Maduro's way of controlling the military. You're loyal to me. I'm gonna, promote you to general, be in charge of some public food store, but you got a general, you get a driver, you get all the benefits. And if you want to get involved in your corrupt activities, Godspeed, but I get a cut. Unfortunately, they had established such a strong network of Cuban CI officers within the military. Secretary Rubin made a great comment about how it's going to take time to de-Cubanize the Venezuelan military and security services, because they've been so not infiltrated, but just taken over by the Cubans at Maduro's behest. And this has not been a freebie. The Cubans don't do this stuff for free. No doubt the Venezuelan government paid a lot of money for it, right? That's just how it works with Cuba. But when you look in hindsight, what happened on January 2nd, as far as presidential security, what a complete failure by the Cubans. You really, you want to take a, kind of a postmortem and do a hot wash on that. So unprepared. And then looking at some of the open source today, that they didn't have him at Miraflores. I thought he was at the palace, but no, they had him in a safe house facility, fortified facility on Forte Tuna, which is the main military base. And 20 minutes to get in and grab him? I can't wait to hear what the body count of the Cuban security personnel was, because they maintained all the inner security for Maduro, and to a greater extent, the outer perimeter also. So kudos to Cuba. Great job, buddies.
I just assume that any deal that we would do with, you're talking about providing future security, stabilization, one of the requirements is going to be that the Cubans are out, that they do just what Marco Rubio said, right? We got to decubanize Venezuela, which will be interesting. And then the other question is, going back to our first podcast with you, the Narco-State. How deep are the hooks of the narco traffickers and their control over, let's say, the municipalities, the police, the state police?
We talked about this last time. The Cartel de los Soles did not start with Chavez, or did not start with Maduro. This started back in the 90s with the National Guard. I mean, the National Guard, I noted previously, the National Guard was considered by DEA at the time as one of the largest trafficking cartels in South America as early as the 90s. So you really need to take a hard look. I mean, I don't see a control by the cartels in a sense that they run these institutions. Rather, they have basically just corrupted these institutions. For me, that's a big difference. They're corrupted. You have the main players that are cooperating with them, but they're not to the point where they're running the institutions. So I think there's hope in that sense. Cartels are smart. They probably don't want to be there right now. Probably not a good time to be in Venezuela. Maybe I'll look for some other means to get my drugs out there. They're adaptable. Then you got the insurgents, Colombian insurgents on the border. I mean, there's just so many factors out there that have to be taken into account if you're going to run Venezuela.
One thing I just want to add, since we're talking drugs, from what you can read, there is drug trafficking going on in Venezuela. It is not a top producer or processor, and it is more of a significant transit hub, kind of like a launching point from South America into different parts of the US or over to Europe or even China. But it's not really a direct source production or processing for some of the key illicit drugs that we see coming out of Colombia or even Peru or Bolivia or Mexico to that extent. Is that about accurate how you read it and what we're seeing in the media?
Ryan, I think you're spot on. I mean, it's always been kind of a transit point, but what's happened under the Maduro regime, it's gone from just being corrupt officials to having the government institutionalize the system of transiting drugs through Venezuela.
Yeah.
I mean, you could call it a narco-state, but it's just, you know, you could get to that point, but it was just, if you had to look at again, I'm not a great academic, big brain like Glenn, but if you
Got to be something in between those ears.
academic viewpoint, I mean, this is a classic example of how a bunch of criminals have taken over the state to run the state as a for-profit organization. That was all it's about. There's nothing about socialism, ideology, revolutionary fever. That stuff went out years ago. Probably the last ideologue was Chavez himself when he died in 2013. Delcy can go up there and, yell and scream about how, the revolution is going to continue and they're not going to give in to the imperialists or the Yankees. Listen, she was in it for one thing, power, right? And monetary gain.
And what about China? I'm curious to hear this take.
So China is a big one here, okay? Because here's what I think where China's going to take a very neutral stance. They're going to come out, and they already have, saying this is, violation of sovereignty and all this other stuff. And okay, China, I get it, right? But Venezuela is so indebted to China. China really has to straddle the fence here, because if you have a new government that comes in, China had been overly supportive of the last government and defending them and trying to get Maduro back. Right. You have a situation where a new government could just come in and just say, all those hundred billions of dollars of loans that we got from you guys that we're supposed to pay back in oil, we think they were illegally signed. We're not going to honor them. Okay. So what's China going to do? They can put pressure on them. Right. I mean, they have hundreds of billions of dollars tied up in loans to Venezuela, and they got a sweetheart deal on this oil. Right. So they don't want to lose that. So if they go in too hard and try and, be that bull in the China shop, I just think it won't turn out for them. So that's where, my strong opinion is that you're going to see a very neutral China.
I should stress that Greenland has not commented yet, so that's very calm there.
Should expect it.
Yes,
Sorry,
maybe that's
I know you don't cover Greenland a lot because they don't speak Espanol there, but
well, maybe that's a positive indicator, Glenn.
Honestly, whenever you see that negative reaction, that's like always a good thing for me. I think the U.S. probably did a good thing when we upset Sergei Lavrov.
Well, you even have, you have the Chilean president, Boric, right, who's a socialist. Well, guess what? He's up for elections this year, or his party is, right? And he was this is very bad, against sovereignty. He knows this is not going to play well in the elections because of the large influx of Venezuelan refugee and the upsurge in crime related to the refugee problem. So you see some very cautious tones in Latin America.
And what I did want to get to was Machado kind of in exile, right? So, and just for people who haven't followed this closely, you've got Maria Corina Machado, who won the Nobel Peace Prize this year. She has been in exile, was fleeted off to Norway just a month and a half ago. In the 2024 election in Venezuela, which the US has stated, and so have many others, was stolen by Maduro, she was not allowed to run. She put all of her support behind Edmundo Gonzalez, who technically did not win, but by all accounts, from a free and fair election standpoint, won overwhelmingly. So Gonzalez would have won that. President Trump has said he doesn't think that the Venezuelan people would respect her. She's not the one he's looking to right now. It's really Delcy Rodriguez, as we noted. Dave, is there any, obviously what we saw in Iraq was insurgency and like fighting factions. Is that something you can envision with the Venezuelan people?
Well, only at this stage, based on what we don't know as far as the administration's way forward, right? We'd only speculate, and that would be that they view Delcy as the means to a transition to a democratic election, right? Where either Edmundo Gonzalez or Maria Mochada could run for the presidency. So I'm waiting for, details of the plan. Right now, again, if I'm just kind of trying to guess what their thinking is, and that's my best guess, that they're looking at Delcy as instead of imposing Maria Mochada or Gonzalez on Venezuela, basically saying, okay, Delcy, we will work with you to transition to a free election.
Glenn, I wanted to ask you something that I found interesting that came up in some of the reporting over the past 24 hours.
I didn't do it. That was
well, it had to do with Turkey, so maybe it did.
I have 4 brothers. Could have been one of them. I'm sorry.
Sex State Rubio was describing how they had set up a pretty nice opportunity for Maduro before going in and gave him the opportunity to go into exile effectively in Turkey. I was a little bit surprised how Turkey was chosen in this area. Are you surprised by that, given your background work in that region, Glenn, or is that just par for the course, Turkey helping out where they can with the U.S.?
No, I wasn't surprised. One, I think that the Turks and the Venezuelans have some pre-existing relationships. I think probably they thought that Turkey might be a place where he would feel comfortable going, Maduro and his family. 2, the Turks are an ally, so maybe they would have been part of the deal to find an off-ramp to settle this without, a major war, major conflict. Again, they have interest there in Venezuela. And 3, great beaches and great food in Turkey. But I would say that, I think the response from Maduro was, okay, we'll consider like stepping down in 2 or 3 years, which was kind of, an obvious ploy to wait out Trump. And my understanding is, to the president's credit, he basically said, no, like, I'm not going to let you string this along. With the previous administration, they made an agreement with that administration and they reneged on the agreement. They kind of got away with that. And, I just think it was very interesting that this administration, by the way, I also understand that the president gave, General Kane and the military the green light to kind of run this thing and didn't micromanage it, which is also from a leadership position, pretty interesting and pretty important and pretty good, I think. So he missed his opportunity for a better deal. And I think he thought he could manipulate, the U.S. and it backfired. So hopefully that's a lesson that will also be seen by some other world leaders, some dictators who are trying to manipulate the United States and string us along.
Dave, especially from the Vector One side, Trump has been so adamant, like, we are going in there to get oil. We're going to get American business going. I'm sure a lot of people are going to be interested in that. Any thoughts on who the winners are in that? I would assume Chevron, because they stuck it out. They've got the inroads there. Somebody's got to rebuild the infrastructure, which maybe it's Schlumberger or some of these other larger companies.
It's not a pun, but it's going to be a gold mine in that sense. And just happens that Venezuela has one of the largest gold reserves in the world, right? Venezuela is so mineral rich. It's got the strategic alloys that we need. It's got almost everything, right? Right now, part of the unfortunate part, again, with this cabal that's been in power there, is that they've allowed these illegal miners to go in and just destroy the environment, rape the land. Of course, they got a cut of it, right? So if we can harness that type, that's just not only petroleum, but you have the mineral riches of Venezuela too. You have a country that needs to be rebuilt from top to bottom. Last time I was there, I think 2013, and I'd been to Venezuela since the late 80s, early 90s. and it looked like a time warp. Nothing had changed, right? I mean, the same infrastructure, same roads, same buildings, nothing. So I think there's definitely going to be a lot of opportunities, right? It's going to be a question. We get back to the security. A company does not want to invest billions in or millions in Venezuela if the security environment and the transparency is not there. Right.
Right.
So, how do you rebuild the justice system? How do you rebuild the legal system? How do you rebuild the security? All these are factors that are just super important to really bringing Venezuela back into the 21st century.
We saw this in Syria last year where there was everyone was very excited. We're going to get into Syria and make millions. And they have rare earth minerals, they have oil, all kinds of projects. But it took time, even with the president leaning so forward on rolling back sanctions. That took time. It's still a little bit complicated. There are security issues on the ground that haven't been resolved. There's some other like interregional geopolitical issues that are impacting stuff. So my guess Venezuela will be the same, although I would hope that we would be in a better position to understand Venezuela.
I think we'd be in a better position to influence. I mean, you have this type of experience in the Ukraine, Glenn, where you've seen where you see the uh, bureaucracy that's corrupt and the difficulty of doing business in a country like that. I think Venezuela right now it's probably worse just because of the hold that the PSUV has on everything there. But I think that I look back when I used to work in Venezuela prior to Chavez, you could do business, right? But you had to have the connections. I mean, the Western companies came in there and you didn't have to pay off everything to get. There was definitely attempts to kind of bleed the Western companies. But if you knew the right people, you could get things done without having to bribe the system to get a license to do A or B or C.
Right.
Guys, I wanted to take just a second to talk through the military op that went down, if we can, to do this. I find this super interesting from my time flying helicopters and then obviously the agency side, but just to really put a point on how incredible this was. And to your point, Dave, we had no embassy there. The news saying the CIA putting officers in without diplomatic immunity, really on their own for a couple months, rolling around Venezuela, somehow developing a source. They've got new drone assets that were supporting them. All this is public reporting. And then for the event itself, you've got joint aircraft launching from, I think I heard 20 different locations, rotary wing and fixed wing. They've got images of 160th, the Night Stalkers, which is just the most amazing special ops aviation unit. You see MH-47s, MH-60s, looks like probably an AH or MH-6 little birds flying along with it. Moving in 100 feet off the deck and then varying altitude. You have a cyber attack that goes in beforehand that hits critical infrastructure, darkens the whole city, so it's even harder to see. Moon Illume is like 94%, which is great, using MVGs with no light on the ground. These guys go in, they're on the ground for, I think, 5 minutes. To your point, Dave, the bodyguards do not work. Looks like maybe 40 people are killed. Unclear if that's a confirmed count, how many of those are bodyguards or police versus civilians. But they did say Maduro tried to get into this very strongly plated steel safe room. They did not quite make it. He was in there closing the door and they stopped it. But they also mentioned Delta had been preparing on this one compound of the 7 or 8 that they knew he would go to. They had made a mock-up of one that they had been hitting over and over and over again to run this precision exercise the way they did. And they were blowing steel doors constantly, depending on the size that they had to get through. In and out, maybe 1 or 2 helicopters are hit. Neither of them go down. They make it back to their staging locations. Suppression of enemy air defenses as they're going in. I mean, it's just like the whole combined arms effort at play. Amazing work. Tons of gratitude to the men and women serving who did that, including having FBI hostage negotiator there in case they needed to work with Maduro, DEA guys right next door. I mean, for you two, Glenn and Dave, how hard is it working that interagency, doing that over months and keeping it secret?
Well, the interesting part is when I was at CENTCOM on the Tier 1 operations, they've developed this routine, which I think is just outstanding. So depending on which Tier 1 team goes in, if it's Dev Group, then SEAL Team 6, they have a big session where the Red Team, Dev Group, right? And if it's SEAL Team 6, they get red team by dev group. And sitting in on these sessions was just fascinating, right? And it was done in such a professional way that I would just love to have sat in that one and just listened to, the back and forth between these guys as they red team each other.
Ryan, you make a great point. I mean, this was done in absolute secrecy, so the leaks were controlled. The unnecessary chatter. So really, kudos. I mean, and I agree with you across the board. I would say that my experience was that we, after 9/11, like the amount of cooperation and joint training and collaboration was great. And I think when you see this, you see that is a result of years of doing side by side training, doing operations together at a smaller scale. We all did that in the war zones. We all did it in other environments. Great partnerships where you learn to speak the same language and you remind each other all the time that you have the same objectives. It's for the Constitution, it's for the flag, for Team America. So really, I mean, every once in a while you can have personalities that don't plug in, but you can have that in any bureaucracy, even within the agency that happened, right? So I say going back to 9/11, though the investment that we made in building relationships. And I know like your father on the state side did that. Dave did it. And, when you're a chief of station, one of your jobs is you're also supposed to represent all those elements out there and have great relationships with them. And that was one of the best things I did in my forced U.S. tours. I loved working with our partners from the U.S. government. And so really great job. And then I do have to say, because it's just me, but when you look at this operation, I asked Dave last night on the phone, how far is Caracas from Miami, right? From U.S., closest U.S., like Key West. A couple of, I don't know, 15,000 kilometers? What, Dave? What do you think?
Oh, from Miami, it's about 1,200, I think, miles.
Yeah. So I was listening to a Russian podcast yesterday, or opposition podcast, and the guy said, the Russians couldn't do this across their border. They're still having a hard time taking Pokrovsk. And the U.S. military and the U.S. intelligence community just pulled this off. I, as an American, am extremely proud. And that's one area where my taxes are being spent well. So God bless those people. We said in our last podcast at the end of the year on New Year's Eve, Brian, those guys, many people, men and women, were away from their families as they were preparing for this. They spent a lot of time away from family. They didn't get to spend the holiday like most Americans do. And so we've all been there before in our previous careers, and God bless those Americans for doing that, because it paid off. So kudos.
The ramifications of this operation just have so many elements to it. It's just not only focused on Venezuela. You look at the kind of the what's going to happen in Cuba now if they lose their oil, they lose their support, they lose the hard currency coming over from all the doctors and security people they have in Venezuela. Okay. I tell you, one person who's probably going to be minding their P's and Q's for the next few months is Daniel Ortega down in Nicaragua.
Yeah. Nicaragua, yeah. He should be
there's
sweating bullets.
another autocrat, just dictator, human rights abuser, just has, tortured, imprisoned his own people, impoverished the country. There's another guy. But I'm sure he's watching his 6 o'clock now as far as what could happen in Nicaragua. But it's a message.
We need to be a little bit cognizant of the fact that, for every action, there's a reaction. And so I go back to my career where we did something pretty big, and everybody on the team where I was a very large team, was very excited. And the chief of station at the time was maybe the best leader I ever worked for in the agency. Pulled me aside. I was in a senior leadership role in that station, and he pulled me aside. He said, "Hey, listen, let everyone celebrate for an hour and then get them back to work." And I said, "Oh, everyone's having a great time. They've earned this. They've been working like crazy for months on this." And he said, "Sure." He goes, "But the enemy gets to say too, and never assume that there's not going to be a response." And sure enough, within 2 days, we already had the response coming at us. So I hope that doesn't happen, but we need to be cognizant of the fact that our enemies are still out there. And, some of them are going to try and exploit this for their own purpose. We already see, for example, countries attacking us, colonialist move, the whole propaganda piece.
Kind of maybe close my comments by saying, in many ways, not that it was easy, but in many ways, the easy part is over. And that was the capture of Maduro. And if our goals and our policy is to transition to a democratic government, this is going to be the difficult part.
Thank you so much, gents. Dave, Glenn, where can people find you, especially if they want to get some consulting or advice on what's going on in Latin America?
Well, I'm available at Victor1Global@gmail. Looking forward to it. I think there's opportunity out there, but I think we need to be very careful and not overstep as to our abilities and capabilities. Venezuela is it's a beautiful country. I spent many years there. Great people, but it's full of like political landmines and things you really need to be careful about.
I just really appreciate Dave taking the time today. Ryan, again, you're a master of turning this around, and hopefully our listeners, our viewers, our followers will find it useful and continue to encourage people to subscribe, to follow us, and then share some comments or ideas. But I should say, after the last podcast, Dave got kudos for his Spanish, which makes me proud since I was his teacher and mentor for years. I was like seeing your son do something well.
Me Spanish, Glenn. You've been teaching me my Spanish.
I know. That's what I'm saying. I was your teacher. So, no, really, we love the comments coming from people that do follow us and listens.
Thank you very much, gents. Have a great rest of the day. Thanks for listening and being a part of the RH community. Would you like to receive the same daily intel brief that Glenn and I read? You can get it for free at restrictedhandling.com. We've curated what we consider to be the most relevant and reputable sources on all things international security, geopolitics, military and intel ops, and economics and sanctions, focused exclusively on Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and the Middle East, to include accompanying podcasts for Russia, China, economics, and spy stories. Just head to restrictedhandling.com, enter your email, and you'll get the daily briefs that Glenn and I both read, and you can leave comments and questions that we can respond to. Thanks again for listening. Stay safe.